Good morning, Tuscaloosa. I'm down here in the children's wing in the museum room. And this is a special place that's usually bustling with kids, but it's quiet today. It's quiet because, we're in this quarantine state. We're in this period, this season of life where we have to be apart from our friends and our church family and things like that. And so what I wanted to do is bring you part 2 of this wisdom from James and hopefully leave you with a little bit of encouragement. Picking up in chapter 1 in verse 12, it says that God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. We talked yesterday about how when testing produces endurance or steadfastness, and when it has its full effect, we're complete, lacking in nothing. And that if we need anything in that lacking, that all we have to do is ask for God, and God is gracious, and He's going to give us out of an abundance to make sure that we have everything that we need. But it's interesting that this text says that God blesses those who patiently endures the testing and temptations that we face. It says here that afterwards that those that go through this and patiently do that are going to receive a crown of life. That's an encouragement to me. I don't know about you, but then when I think of, as we go through these different bumps and bruises and roads and valleys that we lead through, is that there's a purpose for them somehow that we don't see. But then on the end of it, when we patiently endure them, that God is going to give us a crown of life. But another blessing in there, it says that this is a promise that He's already given to those that love Him. So the question is, do you love God? Do you love Him enough that you're willing to endure and patiently go through these trials and these temptations and these testings that you're facing? If you're like me, a lot of times we look for blame. Whose fault is it? If I went and I turned on the TV right now, we'd find that it's this country's fault or this leader's fault of all the different situations that we find ourselves in. Sometimes in our own life, when we're facing these temptations, when we're facing struggles, it's easy for us to say, God's behind this. But the text tells us, in verse 13, it says, God's not responsible for temptation. God does not tempt us. But in fact, the temptations that we face come from our own desires that we've allowed Satan to come into us. And in verse 14, it says, and those things drag us away. Think about that. Think about the concept of being drug away from God. Right now we're being drug away from our friends. We can't be around them as much as we would like to be. And you know how sad that makes you feel, but think about how it would feel to be drug away from God and not be there. And these are things that a lot of times that we do on our own. And we know that when we're drug away from God, it says here in the text that leads to sin, and sin ultimately leads to a spiritual death. So our desire within us must be one where we want to stay close to Him. And the big question is, why would we want to do that? Why would we want to stay close to Him? Because, and the answer is, if we're drug away from Him, we're going to miss out on something. And verse 16 tells us this. It says, don't be misled. If we're drug away from God, it's easy for us to be misled. But he says, do not be misled, my dear brothers. Because listen to this. This is an encouragement. Whatever is good and whatever the perfect gift is, comes down from God. Those great, wonderful, perfect gifts that we're seeing each and every day, whether it's a blessing from a friend or a phone call or a text message or an email, or just the gift of salvation that we have, those perfect and good gifts, we know they come from God. God isn't going to tempt us, because tempting leads to sin that leads to death. But what's God going to do? God's going to give us all the good and perfect things that are in our life. And then notice another encouragement to me in this. And we ask the question, well, why would God do that? Why would God give us so many things? Notice what it says in verse 18. It says, He chose to give birth to us by giving us His true word. God chose us. He gave us His word. He gave us His Son, who was the Word. He gives us the Word of God so that we can be in relationship with Him. And then it says this, and I think this is the greatest encouragement of all, and I want to leave you with this, is that, and we, out of all creation, become His most prized possession. Think about that. Is that when we patiently endure temptations and trials, that God has promised that if we love Him, we're going to have a crown of life. That He's not going to lead us into those valleys. That a lot of times it's our own desires, it's our own thoughts, and those lead to sin and can ultimately lead to a spiritual death. But the challenge here by James, the wisdom from James, is don't let yourself be drug away, because if you're drug away, you're going to miss something. And what you're going to miss is this. You're going to miss those good and perfect things that come down from God each and every day. But God didn't create you for that. In fact, He chose you to give you life through His word. And out of all of creation, we are His most prized possession. Be encouraged today from these words of wisdom from James. God bless.